Hi, I'm Franklin, and this is Law School Strategy, How I Graduated from Law School with a Job. How I Graduated from Law School with a Job is a series of interviews with practicing attorneys and legal professionals to find out more about their career journey. The purpose is for you to hear about how other legal professionals became employed and started their career following law school, or in some cases, relaunched their careers at a later stage in their professional life. It's not just the young lawyers that we'll be talking with, but attorneys across all levels of experience and practice areas. The purpose isn't to try and prove the legal job market is perfect, because it's not, or convince you that it's easy to get a job and there are a lot of jobs out there, because there aren't. However, I do hope you gain some insights, ideas, tips, or other pieces of advice that can help you and your law school strategy. Because I do believe that if you work hard, follow the advice we share, you'll be closer than ever to graduating from law school with a job. On this episode, we have attorney Greg McLawsen from Tacoma, Washington. Hi, Greg.
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks for joining us. I'm glad to have you on. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll go ahead and kick it off with the first question. Why did you go to law school, and what did you do or study before law school?
Yeah, $500,000 question. So probably for all the wrong reasons when it comes down to getting a job. As an undergraduate, I was a philosophy major, so I was the guy sipping cappuccinos in coffee houses, thinking about the big ideas that drive civilization and not so much the job market. I was volunteering in the public defender's office here in Seattle and had some sort of relatively vague notion that going to law school had something to do with grandiose ideas of justice and helping people, and somehow I wanted to be a part of that. This was not fully fleshed out from a standpoint of how it was going to result in a supporting job in the end.
So where did you end up going to law school?
So my wife and I were concurrently applying for law school and a PhD program for her. She's a forensic psychologist. While we were applying, we were actually hanging out in Asia. So I remember getting our acceptance letter when we were at a beach at a relatively remote island in Thailand, where incidentally we're heading tomorrow. So we ended up going to Nebraska, University of Nebraska, because it was the one place where we both got in. The PhD slots were pretty limited. So we spent 4 very interesting years in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Wow, that's impressive to both be going through graduate school programs of that nature. That's pretty impressive.
I ended up loving Nebraska, but in terms of culture shock, I can say that it was a far greater culture shock than, for instance, Thailand is. For a guy coming from liberal Northwest.
Out of the country would definitely be very different. Yeah. So the question that everybody wants to know, did you graduate from law school with a job? And then if so, how did you do it?
So I, very shortly after law school, started working. So yes, the answer is basically yes. I was working as a ghostwriter for a Lexis immigration law treatise. And the way I got the job is I was working at our law school immigration clinic. And Steve Yale-Lohr, who's the title author of this big treatise, sent out a listserv post on a law professor listserv and said, hey, I'm looking for treatise writers. Does anybody have a student who might be interested? And it got passed along to me. And we ended up working together for a number of months and still are in touch for various writing projects. So I suppose the real connection there was basically having done work for my law professor that impressed him adequately that he was willing to, put my name up to this pretty well-known national author.
So can you touch on that a little bit more? What did you do during law school that led towards that? Because it sounds like you might have had some rigorous writing or some other writing things that you were able to accomplish, or was it internships or opportunities with professors? What did you do during law school that helped you position you for that?
Yeah, the one for this was we had a couple legal clinics at law school. And I will say as a side note that for anybody who has a chance to do a live client clinic at their law school, they absolutely must do that. It was by far the most important thing I did during law school. But our immigration law clinic was 2 student clinics, so you had to apply to get in. I was very lucky to get in, and it was a year-long experience of working with clients on various immigration cases, and got to know the professor who was in charge of that clinic very well. I frankly have no idea what he saw in me, but for whatever reason, he became a really strong advocate for me, and still to this day is one of the people I can call up when I need a recommendation. So I think all I could say there was getting in the clinic in an environment where the professor could see the sort of work I was doing and just working my ass off for the clients that we were serving.
So what were some steps that you took in terms of applying for other opportunities? Was it mostly you relied on grades, or was it just professional connections? Kind of what other steps did you take? Because I know you obviously went from that writing opportunity right out of law school, and you were a part of a firm. So can you kind of describe what that process looked like?
Yeah, so after I was basically sitting at home in my pajamas working on this treatise, for however many hours a day. It was very intellectually gratifying work. It paid terrible. So I knew I wasn't going to do this for very long. And I was trying to transition back to Seattle area from Nebraska. So I basically went about the job hunt in the most pathetic way possible of browsing job forums and applying for postings that I saw. And that's ultimately how I ended up landing a judicial clerkship at a trial court out here in Washington State, which was a fantastic, fantastic experience. Got to work with a team of 8 judicial officers, judges, and basically serve as their legal research arm. It was a fantastic experience. But going about a job hunt that way is basically pathetic. And all of the lessons that people should learn by the time they're at that stage of their profession in terms of trying to build strong interpersonal relationships with the people who might be in a position to throw some work their way, I was terrible at. So I do not hold myself up in that regard at that stage of my profession as having done a good job, really.
So your clerkship was for 2 years, and then you kind of knew at the end of that, did you know at the end of that 2-year period that you'd be moving on?
Yeah. So I saw that 2-year event horizon coming up. And
okay. Because I know a lot of students that might graduate and get a clerkship of some kind, either have it for a 1-year period or a 2-year period. So how did you prepare for that, especially when you were trying to apply for jobs? If you saw an opening well in advance of the 2-year period, would you have been able to leave the clerkship early? Would you have wanted to? Or did you have to wait until right towards the end to really start applying and looking?
So with this clerkship, and I think it's pretty common for state court clerkships, you make a commitment to serve for 2 years. Now, it's not a binding commitment in the sense that if I had walked away, they couldn't have stopped me. But that's the period of your life where you're really starting to build your identity as a professional. And the judges that I work for have continued to be really strong advocates for me in the professional sense. One actually just referred a client to me the other day, and you would just completely torpedo your relationship with them if you violated that element of trust by ditching the clerkship early. Now, with that said, we did have colleagues in that history of the clerkship program who left for good reasons. There was a family circumstance that warranted them leaving, but certainly I wouldn't encourage anybody to get into that sort of a program unless you're strongly committed to seeing it through.
Definitely. That's definitely good advice. So can you talk about the next move you made, which was to a law firm, and then shortly after that, or kind of at the same time, maybe you were with a small software firm?
Oh yeah, that's a a side project that's not particularly germane to the legal career. But after the clerkship, I, again, through just applying for a job, I think I probably saw it on Craigslist, ended up transitioning into working for a solo practitioner pretty close to my town in Tacoma. And I think that's when I really started to think more in terms of a legal entrepreneur and less in terms of looking for a job and work. This was the attorney I was working for is a great, very experienced immigration practitioner. She was and is respected all over the country. But I started to look at the way that that law firm and other law firms did their work, and came to be pretty strongly of the conviction, and this is one of the main hats I wear today, that there's so much room for improvement in the process of doing legal work. As just one example, back in those days, it was very common for firms to take emails from clients, print them out, and stick them in a paper folder. And that is such an disastrous use of human time and effort. It just is an abysmal way to store and access that type of information. It's just crazy that we would be doing that. And so, for example, when I opened my firm, we did it in a completely cloud-based, paperless environment. So all of that data access work is done basically instantaneously without any work for the attorney or staff. And that's just the smallest example. I mean, there are 100 different things that I perceive firms to be doing that could be vastly improved upon.
So what was that?
I hope we're delivering on that now in the firm that I now run.
Definitely. I'm sure you really hope that too. Maybe not printing off any more emails at least. So what was that like, making that transition to starting your own firm? I mean, you said you had kind of this entrepreneurial spirit in you. Were you nervous at all? Did you do any business training of any kind, or did you just go for it, trial by fire?
It's by far the hardest thing I've ever done. There was at least a 6-month period there where I was waking up every single night at 3:00 in the morning with a cold sweat, wondering what in the hell I was doing, because it's scary stuff out there. It really is. And even now, I mean, the firm still isn't built into the vision that I have for it. So in a sense, I feel 4 years later, I'm still in that building experience.
So you mentioned that it's a cloud-based law firm. Can you expand on that? Like what is the reasoning for that? Is it cheaper? Is it just a better use of your time to do that? What does that exactly mean?
Yeah, so our firm is Sound Immigration. You can check us out at soundimmigration.com. And we are America's web-based immigration law firm. We're now a 5-attorney practice, and our job is to help families build new lives in the U.S. So most of our work is with married couples and other family members, either transitioning them to a new immigration status in the U.S. or bringing them here if they're abroad. And part of our value proposition to our clients is that we aspire to be the most convenient legal service experience they will ever have in their lives. So if they are I was talking to a client in Luxembourg today. If the person is in Luxembourg or in rural Alabama, like another person we were talking to this morning, we offer them a seamless client experience that makes the process as easy as possible. The idea being here that immigration is a fairly specialized practice area. So if you are in Luxembourg or rural Alabama, the chances are very good that you don't have somebody down the block that you can turn to with a high level of expertise in immigration. So we can fill in that gap by being that person's compass through a very difficult process, regardless of where they are anywhere in the world, as long as they have an internet connection.
Immigration laws are predominantly federal. So that is what allows you to cross state lines, cross country lines, and so you don't really have to worry about individual state laws and being licensed to practice in multiple states. Is that kind of a good understanding of it?
That's correct from a licensing standpoint, that the way that state laws work is when it comes to immigration, if you're licensed in one state, you can practice in any state. However, I do want to say, I talk to folks very often about running virtual law practices, and people always bring up the licensing issue, frankly, as an excuse. So they say, well, I'm a family law attorney, so I could never work in a purely cloud-based environment. And that's a bunch of baloney. There's a really great family law attorney in Florida whose name I'm completely blanking on. who is licensed only in Minnesota. And his business is he sits on his, hammock down in Florida, sipping Mai Tais, and writes appellate briefs for attorneys up in Minnesota. Presumably the Mai Tais come after he writes. But the point being that he basically said, look, I want to live in Minnesota. I'm a family law attorney, but let's figure out a way to make it work. And the way that he makes it work is by doing appellate work, because the attorneys don't care where he is.
So let's back up a little bit and let's kind of pretend that you're just now graduating from law school. What advice would you give to law students that might be looking to do exactly what you did, except would you recommend that they go kind of in a similar route where they get a little bit of experience, maybe with an established law firm or a clerkship of some kind before they open their practice? Or would you recommend that they just go out and open up their own practice without really having any other solid experience under their belt?
Let me deploy some cold water that I recently used at a mentorship event here in Seattle. It was met with not very many smiles. At a event hosted by The Lawyerist, and if any of your listeners don't read the Lawyerist blog, they should start yesterday, lawyerist.com. So Sam Glover and Aaron Street, the guys at Lawyerist, hosted a event over in St. Louis and basically got together kind of forward-thinking people in the legal profession to be interesting people in the same room. Every single person there agreed with the following statement, that 85% of legal jobs are going to disappear. And the only discussion amongst the group was, are we talking about 5 years or 20 years? So when people are getting out of law school thinking about what their careers are going to look like, they need to understand on a very deep level that things are changing fast out there. The landscape is looking very, very, very different. So I would start by saying, don't even think about it in terms of a job. From getting out of the gate, you have to have an entrepreneurial mindset, even if you're hoping to find a home in an existing firm. You've got to not be thinking in terms of me first, I want a job for me. You need to be thinking first and foremost about what is the totally unique value proposition that I can bring to an organization and demonstrate to them how you're going to help them kick ass in this very difficult market. So it's got to be about the organization you're approaching and not about you.
Yeah, that's a great kind of flip to do in your head, because I think regardless of if a law student or a recent graduate applies that to their own mindset, if they at least take that going into an interview, that would leaps and bounds help them to at least come across as more interested in the ways they can assist the law firm or the organization or whatever the job organization they're applying for. That way it's not so much of a mindset of getting the job. And I know it's hard for law students and recent grads to not think about just getting a job, just get a job, but flipping that is excellent advice. And I've actually never heard that before. So I think that's great advice.
Now, and in terms of going the opening your own firm route, one thing that people have to understand is that at the point that you've made that decision, you are accepting the fact that practicing law is going to be a minority of what you do from that day forward. When you run a firm, you absolutely first and foremost have to be operating a business. The legal technology firm Clio, who just released a gigantic data report, benchmarking report on lawyer income, reports that most solo attorneys in the United States collect for 1.4 hours of their time per day. So think of your busy lawyer 9-10 hour workday. You're only getting paid for 1.4 hours of that. The rest of that people are spent trying to promote their practice, doing admin stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So if you don't have a, tiger's blood appetite for going after that work in a big way, the admin and entrepreneurial side of the business, for God's sake, do yourself a favor and don't head down that path. Because when you open the doors to your firm, practicing law might be the most important thing you do, but time-wise, it's not going to be the biggest thing.
Great. Yeah, definitely good advice. So we're going back to graduating from law school and having that job, or just in any of the transitions that you made. Were there any times that you struggled or faced any challenges in searching for a job? Not necessarily doing your own practice, but just in the job search itself.
Yeah, it is a tough market. I graduated in 2009, and it was brutal. Before you and I started recording, you were saying, gosh, it's tough for people in the top 10% of your class. And not because I'm such a cool dude, but I'm just saying I was in the top 10% of my class, and there definitely weren't firms, fawning over me and taking me out to lunch. And I can't even imagine how tough it would have been, a little bit further downstream. So yeah, it was tough in 2009. My perception is that it's even tougher now.
So now that you own your own law firm, what advice would you give to law students that are either looking for jobs or applying and trying to reach out to either solo practitioners or small to mid-sized law firms? What advice would you give them in terms of how to approach you? What have you seen that works well or doesn't work well? Just general advice that you would share.
One thing that I've observed meeting with a lot of young attorneys, I chair this, or until last month, I chaired the small practice section of the Washington Bar and met with a lot of younger attorneys. And I would say an observation I had was that people need a much clearer sense of who they are and what they want. It was very often that I would meet with a young attorney, and he would say, well, I want to do family law or criminal law or probate, and I want to work at a big firm or a law firm, and just trying to be all things to all people. And you just can't be that in this marketplace. You need to develop a very clear and very genuine personal brand. And brand sounds corny and hokey, but what it means is you need to know who you are and what you're going to be the very best in the entire world at, and be able to pitch that concisely to potential employers and just people, who you're trying to network with. But they need to walk away not with the sense of, oh, hey, Jill is a pretty cool gal. Seems like she's nice enough. And what does she really do? What is she interested in? You've got to have a narrow identity, or else you're spread too thin.
That's excellent advice. And actually, on the last episode, we talked about that with my other guest, and it sounds really cheesy or corny to use a marketing term like branding yourself, but as a law student, that's really important. It's great to hear that from somebody who's been out for a couple of years now and has been hearing from law students that might not be as prepared in that. So really great to hear that. So I'll ask you one last question, kind of round out this discussion, but you're very heavily involved in a lot of different bar associations, and you've done a lot of publications and speaking engagements. So what have you learned from all of that, and why do you continue to do that and be involved in associations?
Funny timing for that. I actually... it's a tough one to answer, to try to think about the return on investment for publication time. On the one hand, I've reflected on a lot of the writing that I've done and decided it was basically a total waste of time. It's very common advice to get from your career services department to go out and publish a bunch of law review articles. And it takes an extraordinary amount of time. I'm not sure it's time well spent. With that said, there was a line of articles I wrote on this very niche immigration law issue. It's called the I-864 Affidavit of Support. And as a consequence, I ended up being like the national guy for this. And we've spun off a separate law firm to deal exclusively with this type of case. And that's all just because I started writing a couple articles about it. So I don't know where exactly that leaves your audience, except to say that, don't simply assume that churning out kind of generic legal publications will necessarily be helpful. But, and this goes back to niching and brand identity. If you can build yourself as the number one expert in some particular field, even if it's very arcane, that's a pretty good thing.
Definitely. I think the ABA has a book published by Ernie Svensson, Ernie the attorney on Twitter, and he has a book called Blogging in 1 Hour for Attorneys. And I think that's a really great approach because he talks about how you should schedule posts and sit down and not waste too much time with it, but at the same time produce quality content. And I think, and you can tell me if you agree, there's a difference between spending some time doing just generic blog posts that are actually worthwhile and branding yourself in a particular area, and then also spending hours upon hours researching and doing law notes that may or may not get published and might not see a return on investment. So what do you see that works best for you? Are you going to continue to keep writing, because obviously you spun off and created that other law office, but will you continue to write even though you've kind of had mixed reviews with it?
Yeah, so I would draw a sharp distinction between like traditional academic writing, like you were just talking about, and blogging. Certainly, there is so much opportunity for people building traffic by producing helpful content on their website. And there are a number of law students. The one that comes to mind is Miguel Willis. Gosh, what is his URL? If you Google Miguel Willis, he'll probably be the top hit. And he's done an extraordinary job as a law student, building out, building basically his identity online as a legal tech entrepreneur by, as a law student, building out a blog. It's been very helpful for him. And it's certainly, I'm sure the entire website took him less time than a single law review note would have.
Definitely. That's great advice. And I'll be sure to drop a link down in the description of the video below so that people can link to that, as well as some of the other things that you mentioned as well. We'll make sure to include those to easily link. But I don't want to take up any more of your time. I think we've got a full show here. So some excellent, great advice. I really appreciate you taking the time to share it and answer these questions.
Yeah. And by the way, kudos to you. This is a very cool project you have going, and thumbs up for taking the initiative and just making it happen.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely hope it helps people. So, and thank you everybody at home for watching. As you know, you can subscribe for more videos, and you can keep coming back every Wednesday for new videos. They post in the morning, and be on the lookout for those new episodes of How I Graduated from Law School with a Job.